I'm Lawrence White, and if you look at the table of contents in the book that you've got, alas, my name got misspelled. But I'm really Lawrence J. White, and I'm here to talk about the credit rating agency. And like Rick, you can tell we're the two academics here. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to say, then I'm going to say it, and then I'm going to tell you what I said. OK. So I want to start off with the mandate and the disclaimer. And here, as you can see, an insured state savings association may not acquire or retain any corporate debt securities not of investment grade. And I'm sure, Rick, I'm not very good at weaving through the CFR. You're going to have to help me. There's similar language for commercial banks. But notice that investment grade is something that's determined by the credit rating agencies. Okay? And then over here on the right, any user of the information contained herein should not rely on any credit rating or other opinion contained herein in making any investment decision. Standard language at the bottom of every Standard & Poor's rating, and similar language at the bottom of Moody's and at the bottom of Fitch. And I look at that, and I don't know whether to laugh or cry. Okay? All right. Now, this is a theme that Joe had talked about. Information, that's what the credit rating agencies are all about. They're trying to help lenders and borrowers address the fundamental question of finance. Am I going to get repaid or not? And so rating agencies provide information that, if done well, can help the lenders figure out what's the likelihood. Is this guy a good risk? Is he a not so good risk? But it's important to remember they are not the only game in town. There are smaller advisory services. Big financial institutions can do their own research. There are fixed income analysts, hundreds of them in the major financial firms in this country. They even have their own professional organization. It's called FIASI, Fixed Income Analyst Society Incorporated. You can go on their website and you can find their everything about their society, fiasi.org. And I'm not making this up. They actually have a Hall of Fame. Okay, there is a FIASI Hall of Fame. I'm not making this up. So these guys are not the only game in town. All right, how did we get here? I've got to walk you quickly through some history. And John Moody first came up with publicly available published ratings in April of 1909. I have a photocopy of the original manual. Others followed. Rating use was voluntary. These guys were meeting a market test. This is before the SEC requires a lot of disclosure of information. These guys are meeting a market test. Their basic model is an investor pay models. They sold those thick rating manuals to investors. Okay, I'm going to get ahead of the story a little bit and just tell you the photocopy machine does in that model. That 1959, it's September of 1959. It's the Xerox 914 for those of you who remember this kind of stuff. All right, go back. In 1936, the game changes because, for perfectly understandable reasons, bank regulators, for the first time, require banks to pay attention to ratings. They cannot, and this is still true today, they cannot hold junk bonds. They can only hold investment-grade bonds. As determined by whom? As determined by that handful of rating firms. Over the following decades, other financial regulators follow with similar mandates. And so here, this is an institutional market. Here are these big institutional players who must follow this handful of ratings, raters' ratings. So even if you weren't regulated, even if along the same lines, you would want to pay attention to what the rating firms had. So these guys have a guaranteed market. Okay, in 1975, in a little known at the time, and one of the best kept secrets, not that it was hidden, it's just unless you were avid reader of the Federal Register, or you worked at the SEC or one of the credit rating agencies, you'd probably never heard of the NRSRO system, the nationally recognized statistical rating organization system. But the SEC creates it in 1975, grandfathers in Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch, and then becomes a barrier to entry. So that in a crucial time in the end of the year 2000, when all of the subprime stuff has to get those ratings in order to be able to be bought by a commercial bank, by a money market mutual fund, by a pension fund, by an insurance company. Only those three guys are there. Now, the last part of the story is that in the early 70s, they switched from that investor pay model to an issuer pay model. Remember that photocopy machine, that Xerox machine? It's the Xerox phenomenon. They're worried about free riding. They're worried about the same thing that did in the music industry during this past decade. They're worried that it will happen to their rating manuals, and so they go over to an issuer pay model, which has some obvious potential conflicts of interest. And yet, for the first 3 decades, until the early 2000s, that model doesn't break down. The potential conflicts don't happen, and that's illustrated by this very famous quotation by Tom Friedman. There are 2 superpowers in the world today, in my opinion. There's the US and Moody's. US can destroy you by dropping bombs. Moody's can destroy you by downgrading your bonds. And believe me, it's not clear who's more powerful. This is not the image of the credit rating agencies rolling over and doing whatever issuers want. This is the image of Moody's being the tough guy, being the guy who's going to downgrade you, and everybody's in fear of that. And so the model didn't break down. Why didn't it break down? Because the agencies did care about their reputations. Also, there were thousands of issuers. They were relatively transparent, so that any issuer who would come to a rating agency and say, I don't like that rating, you better give me a better rating, would say, the rating agency could say, hey, my reputation's too important. All right. The Congress finally gets wind of the NRSRO system, gets wind of what an opaque barrier to entry the SEC has been, and new legislation gives the SEC regulatory powers, but doesn't allow them to influence the ratings or business models. And there are actually 10 NRSROs today, but it's clear the big 3 still dominate. Finally, there is why are we here? Why am I even talking about credit rating agencies? Because they messed up. They messed up big time in dealing with residential mortgage-backed securities. Why? What changed? Well, there were many fewer issuers, so the threat, I'll take my business elsewhere, was much more potent. Errors were harder to detect. They're a tight oligopoly, remember, only 3 of them, and they mess up. All right, where do we go from here? First, well, we could try to continue to rely on their long-run reputations, but clearly that's not where we want to go. That hasn't worked so well. So the alternative, and this is the popular route, which is take them, grab them by the lapels, shake them, and say, do a better job. And that's where the political system is going right now. The trouble is, this is going to raise barriers to entry. It's going to ironically make the incumbents even more important. Why would we want to do that? It's going to discourage innovation, discourage flexibility, and I have severe doubts as to whether it's really going to work. And so what would I like to do instead? Well, let's cease outsourcing, delegating those safety judgments. Ratings should no longer have the force of law. Eliminate that NRSRO category and reduce or preferably eliminate the regulation of the bond rating firms, because the bond markets are institutional. Bond managers are going to have memories. They're going to have judgment. They need oversight. So you should not think this is some wild free market, no regulation crazy that you're listening to. I do believe in prudential regulation, but we've got to get it right. We've got to get the burden directly on the bank, the pension fund, the insurance company, the money market mutual fund to justify their decisions, but open up the source of information that they can get to help them with their decisions. And there are possibilities of entry here. Maybe Joe Stiglitz might decide to get into the bond rating business, or Raj, or some of you out here. There is entry possible, and that can bring new methodologies, new technologies, even new business models. And so, in summary, I got to tell you now what I told you. Regulators should cease that outsourcing, eliminate the NRSRO category, open up the information possibilities rather than closing it up the way we've been closed, and you would have the possibility of new ideas in a way that has not been true for over 70 years. Thank you very much.